Darlin'? Hey, darlin', you got a little something on your shirt. Carl snapped out of his reverie long enough to shrug his shoulders and smile up at the waitress before diving back into his best sloppy joe he'd ever tasted. It seems like he lost all sense of proper dining etiquette after his first bite, but it didn't faze her for a second. She had seen that glassy-eyed gaze many times before. She tossed a few more napkins on the table and shuffled away to the top of the customer's coffee. A little while later, Carl dipped the napkin in his water and dabbed the greasy red splotch on his shirt. He did it more for the sake of appearance than anything else. The shirt was easily written off of his mind, worth a while sacrifice, for discovering the best damn meal he'd ever have. "Oh, darling, I don't think it's coming out," said the waitress with a motherly tone. He glanced at her name tag. "Can I get one more to go, Nancy?" Nancy smiled. "Sure thing, sugar." The 3-hour drive home was almost unbearable. He kept glancing out of the greasy paper bag in the passenger seat. Carl couldn't possibly eat another bite, but all he really wanted to do was to pull over and eat that sloppy joe. He wiped the escaping saliva off of his mouth and revved his car up to 15 miles per hour over the limit. Carl didn't even think of unpacking his car. He just grabbed the dodgy bag and rushed into his house. Moments later, the paper bag lay in shreds beneath the dining table. He carefully peeled back the foil wrapping, revealing the monster of a sandwich within. The cold, congealed mess before him seemed to even taste even better than the fresh one he had earlier. The soggy 6-inch bun didn't dissuade him one bit. He devoured it quickly and wished he had another. The long drive out between him and that only thing he cared about was to eat more was beginning to weigh on him. He'd make the trip straight from work on Fridays and sit down on his booth with 2 delicious sloppy joes. 30 joes would make the long drive home with him, but eventually it wasn't long enough to last him until the weekend. He was putting on so much weight. His girlfriend was always lecturing him about his eating habits. "Carl, you've outgrown your clothes 4 times in 3 months. That's not healthy." Carl would hate to admit it, but he knew something he had to change. His new place was less than a mile away from the diner, and his job was the only gas station in town gave him plenty of chances to eat between the transactions. He had felt bad about how he left things between him and his girlfriend, but the remorse didn't last long. They even displayed framed pictures of him in his booth at the diner, which he had visited at least 3 times a day. 7 months since the first life-changing Joe, and how he could finish off 4 of them at a time. 2 for breakfast, 3 or 4 for lunch, 4 for dinner, and of course the occasional one for a snack. Carl didn't really have to think much anymore, other than the next sloppy Joe. He couldn't have been happier. The world seemed so much easier to traverse now. Everything just fell into one place as he sloughed off the trappings of his old life and focused on what really was important to him. "Hey Nancy, what can I do for you, hon?" "Well, I've been wondering. You guys are out in the middle of nowhere, but you're so busy. How would you do it?" "Nothing to it, sugar. It's all because of our loyal customers. Years and years, regulars like yourself. Just look around all the pictures on the walls. Oh, that reminds me. I'm sorry to tell you this, but due to the rise in food costs, we have to start charging you $2 more per Joe. You okay with that, darling?" This almost recent cost hike didn't even seem to register in Carl's mind. He had been absent-mindedly said, "Uh-huh," as he looked around the fitted photos of heavily obese people, all the way to the ceiling in some places. He looked at his picture hanging on the wall from his booth. It showed him sitting down with 2 sloppy joes on the table, his double chin ascending, the wide smile on his face. He glanced down at his table and realized that he pushed it too far as the other side for the booth to allow him to slide in and out. There wasn't even enough room for even a child to sit on the other side. His gut had already pressed the edge of the table. Carl took the picture off the wall, pushed it past Nancy, and headed towards the bathroom. He stood there, before the mirror, compared himself to the photo. The guy in the photo was much bigger than he used to be before all that sloppy joes, but this image in the mirror looked like someone had eaten both of those guys. Carl pinched the rolls under his fat of his chin and jiggled them. He thought about how he used to view people as lazy, insecure, and even stupid. It seemed strange to him that even since he had started putting on weight, he never once saw himself that way. His gurgling stomach reminded him of his 4 joes being prepared right in front of him in the kitchen. The suddenly sickening hungry, he came out of the bathroom and started to scrunchize the photos in the hallway. Nancy stepped up to him. "I wouldn't count them all if I was you, hon. Your order will be up soon. Why don't you go sit down? You topped off your sweet tea." She then began to walk away as Carl spoke up. "All these people in these photos are dead now, are they?" Nancy sighed and turned to face Carl. "Most of them, but you don't seem to think about it, sweetheart. All of our regulars are just the happiest they've ever been right to the end." The ding 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 of the order up bell yanked Carl from his depressing empathy. "I bet it's your joes right now, darling." She gave his fat shoulder a reassuring squeeze and headed over to the order up window. He stood there in the hall entrance and looked out into the diner. The place was crowded with the usual familiar faces he had walked over the months of bulk up himself. Foot-long chili dogs, fried chicken with pasta, double bacon cheeseburgers, chicken and waffles, sloppy joes, and all sorts of huge proportions of artery-clogging foods were being devoured by the perfectly content customers. He wondered how many of them would succumb to the heart failure within the year. Carl slid into his booth, sipped his sweet tea, and thought about the overwhelming contentness he had felt since he had moved into this little past-fruit town. He hung his picture back on the wall as he thought about the photo it had replaced came to his mind. He vaguely remembered Nancy telling him her name was Ginger, and she loved the chicken and waffles. He recalled how happy she looked with the bottle of maple syrup in one hand and a fork in the other. Nancy showed up with 2 trays and expressively transferred the joes to the table. "Let me get you some extra napkins." Carl then looked at the 4 huge sloppy joes before him and uttered, "Happy right to the end, huh?" Nancy beamed a wide, toothy grin over her shoulder. "That's right, sugar." Carl patted his sides of his belly and expertly grabbed the joe with both hands. "Well, then tell the cook to get more ready. I want to try for 5 today."